Hello, good evening. Ryan, Rafik, and Ian in this order. I think I'm gonna skip the big Son Lux introduction of who the band is and where you're coming from, etc., because I suppose most people who are here will be familiar with Son Lux and some of your records at least. So let's not do the big sort of Wikipedia Son Lux entry, you know. What struck me as not weird, but just something I really noticed is the transformation from solo artist producing on his own, doing your own productions, then getting a live band in to perform a record live, then the live band turning into the project, into the studio band, and then the next step which is probably figuring out with that live band turned studio band how to become a live band again and how to play the record.
You could do our interviews for us. That was that was very.
No, I would. Now I would be like, elaborate, please.
It's been really condensed. I guess at this point, almost 2 years since I met Ryan. And since we started playing music together. The first show we ever played was in January of last year, and one of the first shows we played, I think our fifth show, was at AB. And that was, we were just, originally the idea was to be the live band for Son Lux. And it went so well, we kind of like got all up in his space, and it was kind of a coup, and it was good, and we just decided, we were in the van, and like kind of Ryan would be like making something, and he'd like show it to one of us, and we'd go, oh, but how about like blah blah blah, and it was a very natural sort of development. And this last record, Bones, we did a lot of it on the road while on tour together, so I suppose maybe some of like the energy and spirit of like us being a live band probably influenced the way that record came out. Not that we like created it the way most bands like make music, where they like get in a rehearsal space and like someone's like, oh, I have these songs, and then like let's arrange them and we play them, and then we play them like on it. It wasn't like that, but it was like, I think the energy of what we do live kind of came out of it on that record. And then like originally, like I was thinking like, oh, that's great, like I'll help with the record, then making the live show for that should be easier. But it was, I mean,
it never is.
It was so hard, but we're okay now. We'll be fine tonight. But it was not easy. Because we made the record like with no complete disregard for what it was gonna be like live. Like we weren't really thinking about that, like because we wanted to make the album, and that's like one medium, and then the stage is like a totally different medium, and it took a bit of massaging to like figure out how we wanted to do it live, and it's pretty different than the record. So, yeah.
Well, there's something that also happens a lot, I feel like, in this band, where there's kind of a moment where somebody does something they've never done before in front of the other two, like on stage when we're warming up or sound checking or something, and that idea gets filed away somewhere, and then in the studio later it reemerges and kind of gets pushed to a very drastic version of itself that, especially when you're not thinking about how to execute it on stage, you go back later and you're like, oh shit. Like, we sort of push this idea to an extreme that,
So for example, like some of your guitar stuff.
when we were sound checking Lost Such a Trying today, and we were doing that extended section that we added for the live show that sort of evolved over time, I realized how almost every single section of that turned into something on Bones. Like there's the like beginning part, which is sort of a precursor to like the You Don't Know Me bass line, and then the next part that's like a flight guitar section, so that it's just, I think these kind of processes can can inform each other in a way that is pretty extreme, and an idea can get kind of, get mutated and grow in a different direction, and then like bringing it back into its original context becomes a challenge that's fun.
So it's definitely not the live drummer and guitar player in a room vibing off each other playing live. So it's would it be correct to say that it's more like personality or sort of energy between the three of you, like exchanging ideas, or?
Yeah, no, I think there's a particular chemistry that we have that when we discuss music and we think about music, we don't really think about it all as like through the lens of our instruments, and a lot of times the ideas we have, if we have ideas at all, that are traditional, they're generally like rhythmic ideas, as we all are kind of, we're rhythmic musicians, I think, first, if we had to be sort of categorized. And so totally forgot your question. But
I think you answered it anyway, so sort of, yeah.
Good. That's good.
Since you mentioned doing a lot of the initial ideas of the album on tour or in the van, how do you still, technology is still developing in a way that makes it more possible to do that kind of stuff? Because I'm slightly older. I remember that stuff starting up.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah, absolutely. I think because we worked on our first record together in a very compressed time frame and under a lot of tension and stress, which is the touring experience, is you're sort of out of your own comfort bubble, and you're not sleeping in your own bed, and you can't just, your time isn't your own, and there's this feeling like it's glamorous, and in some ways it is, but it's mostly not, well, you do know. So in that context, we discovered our friendship and our particular musical chemistry, and in that sort of crucible, we discovered a lot of fertility for new ideas, but we were also inherently inhibited, time and space, mostly space, working out of the back of a van, headphones and no electricity sometimes, and and all those limitations, I think, added up to a really good thing, because we were sort of able to focus more on our ideas and how we can push ideas through a difficult and inhibited system, rather than like sitting around, like you said, guitars plugged in, drums set up, synths, and all these like microphones. It wasn't like that at all. It was kind of the opposite of that.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, I kind of want to just describe what this looked like. So we'd be in the back of a mid-sized van, and
which is basically like this, but a little more squeezed up.
yeah, and Ryan would have a music stand that was gaff taped to the ground, and on it there'd be a laptop that was gaff taped to the stand, and then he'd have this special shelf that was just really the best purchase ever. It was like €7 at €5. He got 2 of them. He got a second one eventually because they're so good, and it clips. Yeah. Oh, it was in Cologne, but it clips onto the music stand, and on there he had gaff taped a few hard drives that were bus powered. And then we had a headphone splitter that was plugged into another headphone splitter so that the 3 of us could all listen. And, and so we would just be, and he had a little MIDI keyboard that sat in his lap, like a cheap Akai one. And he'd be sitting there working, and, I'd have another computer in my lap, like working on stuff. And then we'd be trading ideas. But, this is really like,
And then sometimes Ian, he has this like little
Oh,
Native
yeah.
Instruments iPhone app.
Yeah. The machine one, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
I mean, there's definitely a record. The idea for a full song on the record that started on your iPhone, or it's not. It didn't end up on the record, but it'll end up on some record sometime probably, and it started on your iPhone.
But yeah, I mean, I think like beyond even just like not having guitars and drums, it's like it's important to note that like Ryan has never really owned a synthesizer, like an analog synth.
Hardware synth. Yeah.
Like a hardware synth, like everything's in the box for the most part. I mean, a lot of it is fragments of, we like do sessions in studios, to sort of create sampleable material for ourselves, and that's what like
The
to
last
do the first step.
the last hardware synth I bought, I mean, my parents bought it for me when I was I was like in the middle of high school, and it was like an expensive curse file. I'm 36, so that was 2 decades ago. And yeah, but I wasn't really electronic. I didn't really like do electronic music at all until like halfway through college. So like it wasn't natural really for me. The only reason I had like a synth, and the one that I had, is because it had good like clarinet samples, not because there was like a fucking filter sweep on it or something.
For a while, those chords files used to be like the thing to get, right? And
It was
then,
like what was it? It wasn't a K2500, but it was like one of those PC88 MX. And the MX because it had like expansion. Like an oboe.
That MX with the oboe samples.
So since you mentioned doing studio sessions to sort of get sampleable material together, I know I've read that you also sort of have a sort of constant collecting of samples going on. I was wondering, is there any way you organize those things? Is there a system to it, or is it just like?
You just back up in triplicate, and then hopefully you can find it later. No, I mean I'm pretty good at file management. I mean, yeah, it's like you spend a day in the studio collecting one of it, like once in a lifetime sounds. You're gonna do everything you can to like keep that stuff safe. So.
Is there any field recording?
And it's
like
important it's important file management. This is like such a geeky discussion. I love it. No, it's good. File management is really important because you need to be able to access. You need to be able to execute your whims, your creative whims, quickly. You don't want to be tied up in like the logistics of like locating anything, whether it's a mic cable, which happened to me the other day, and it's just like drove me nuts, like where all my mic cables go, and it totally screwed up my whole creative process that day. And then, but yeah, like so file management. If you have this idea, I remember this one time back in 2010, I forgot that I recorded that soprano saxophone weird sound. And if you have this idea, you can, and if you have good file management, you could go there quickly. And I think a lot of times in the creative process, we're all humans who need to sleep, and so time is really important.
Yeah.
Okay. The spirit of a moment is really important too, I think. And for me, I love to create, like I'm improvising, it's like a performance, like as you're creating, if you're fluid enough with your tools, then you're essentially improvising. The studio is your instrument, and you know how to improvise.
File management. Do you have a favorite cloud backups? No, just kidding. Unless you really want to answer that.
This is a man who has custom skins for WeTransfer. Like when you get a WeTransfer from Ryan, it's like the Son Lux logo.
I got clients, bro.
Going back to those, like,
it does look good. I kind of want one too.
Maybe you can sell it as merch as well, like your own sound. Like, going back to those studio sessions, Rafik, if you the way you treat the guitar in those sessions, are you looking to sometimes to not have it sound like a guitar, or often have it not sound like a guitar, or because I saw some of the live playing, and it's sort of, to me, it sort of goes back and forth between both.
Yeah, I mean, I think out of all of the years that I've been listening to music and playing the guitar, very few of those years have really been spent, or few moments have been spent studying guitar players in the scheme of things, like relative to other things. I really love certain guitar players, especially. I mean, I wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for Jimi Hendrix, and like there's like certain people who have really inspired me and have made me love the guitar, but largely, I've kind of always listened to music. Like Ryan was saying, none of us really think from the perspective of our instruments so much, and it's the same with Ian too, I think. But when we're in the studio, that's often a part of it, and a lot of times, like, things that Ian and I will do in the studio don't have our instruments like involved at all. So I won't even have a guitar, and we'll just be doing something else. But if I am using the guitar, it was actually interesting to me how often the guitar stuff that I recorded was recorded pretty minimally. Like, I didn't have like a huge chain of pedals or whatever. A lot of the time it was the guitar straight into the amp, or like just one or two things. But we would, transform the sound kind of, really thinking about, I tend to think about the guitar when I'm performing it, and improvising it on stuff like that, as a kind of microcosmic producerly realm, and so I'm just producing my guitar playing as I go. So when you have a studio, you don't really need to do that so much. So then the guitar is just one of many tools, and the way that you approach it is with that full arsenal,
And so whatever sound or playing you did on the guitar at that moment in the studio can later on turn into something.
Exactly.
Yeah, and actually that hits on kind of like a big headline for us, which is that we're always trying to discover the capacity for evolution and for discovery within a piece of sound that's already tracked. Mm-hmm. So we record early, and with Bones, anytime we were home, we just got into the studio and tried to get as much material as we could. Not because we had arranged a bunch of parts and because we had songs, quote unquote, and this is the verse, this is the chorus, or anything like that. It wasn't like that at all. The idea was to create a library of sounds and ideas and improvisations and urges that we then, once they were printed forever in time, could then be catalyzing forces for discovery. Finding sounds inside of sounds, finding songs inside of worlds of sound, but beginning with sound itself first. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I've always been called an electronic musician, and I think I don't know if we'd be called an electronic band now, but it's hard to say. Now that it's a band, you're less likely to be called that. And it was always a little uncomfortable for me because I'm almost never really working with purely electronic sounds. Almost always using our starting points are organic in nature, acoustically resonating things, or like in the case of guitar, something that is captured with a microphone, or So.
Yeah, it's like the result of human action or some action.
Yeah. Okay, and maybe this is a good question for Ian, where. Probably once the record's recorded, you can have to find yourself a way to replicate it live. And for instance, you find yourself imitating a certain drum programming feel in playing live, right?
Yeah, and that was, when I first got asked to play for Son Lux, I was like, oh, this is my shit. I've been obsessed with sort of, I guess you can say drunken or sort of awkward, weird, glitchy sort of type playing for a long time. it really was like perfect. Like when we first started, like I don't know, like because I'd heard your music before or whatever, and like I was like definitely into that, and it was cool to dive into that and kind of have to recreate these feels. But a lot of them, like he plays like a lot of like on Lanterns, like a lot of the stuff. I know you like when you recorded it, you just like played it on like a controller or something. So it is like, but you know, but it's like a captured weird moment looped. You know what I mean? And like I have to like find a way to like make that feel good, and so I don't know if that was what you were talking about.
Yeah, because
like sort of like off kilter, sort of like.
I thought about it because I once saw this like 15-year-old singer in the studio, like R&B singer, and the way she sang, she sounded like she was auto-tuned, because she grew up listening to lots of auto-tuned music. So I can imagine like kids growing up to like sort of off-kilter, Dilla type, whatever, hip-hop, and then would then take up the drums. That's the way they start playing. And like all of us who grew up before that, we're fucked basically, because we're never gonna have that, you know, sensibility in a way.
Well, there's this. I mean, I think it's really interesting that seems to like affect everybody in this way that you don't even think about. I mean, in those cases, there's like a more obvious example of how technology is involved, and many times it's like a very purposeful thing. But I've spent a lot of time playing with and studying jazz and jazz musicians, and one of the things that really struck me is that like really traditional, old school, acoustically minded jazz musicians play in this way that sounds like those old records, which were tracked to a wax cylinder. Yeah. Which totally shapes the way that stuff sounds. But because these guys don't realize that, and they grow up on those records, and that's their connection to the music, they're playing how it sounds when it's tracked through the wax cylinder. Yeah. So even people who are like really kind of acoustic purists at this point are influenced by like the technology of recording. And it's just a crazy thing. Another thing, just going back to what Ian was saying though, is that thing about kind of like mimicking the feel of programming and trying to reproduce that has really come full circle in this band, because there are a lot of tracks on the new record that sound like Ian's playing them, but it's actually programmed drums, and it's Ryan implementing things that Ian told him about how he plays, you know. So like there are like tracks where it's like it really sounds like Ian. It's like basically straight up
Ryan's
like pretending to be you. Pretending to be Ian.
Hologram Ian.
But see, that's what happened, right? So we formed this band, you know, and we, you know, and this chemistry created fertile soil for new ideas, and that was one of the reasons why I knew that this moving forward that this was the moment to make an evolution for Son Lux from a solo project to this band, because I could tell that there were things that these guys were doing that were morphing my brain in a way that I really thought was great. You know, and it was because they were giving things to me, and I knew that if I'm gonna really develop, you know, I need help, but not just any kind of help. I need a particular kind of help, and it felt right. You know, that's this kind of.
Yeah, we tricked you.
Yeah, you tricked me. I fell in love.
Let's talk about let's take it into another direction maybe. Let's talk about, with a big word, the message in the records, the lyrics, the things they portray. I've been reading some interviews preparing for this, and what often came back was this sort of I have to check my. No, this general feeling of sort of, would it be right to say civil unrest, and like a sort of and a sense of like not impending doom. That's maybe a little exaggerated, but still. And which got me thinking, and this is gonna be like sort of, I'm gonna go off on a tangent a little, and then you have to call me back if I go too far. Would it be unreasonable to say that the way the music and the way you treat your music and the way you handle it's sort of this alienating thing where you take existing material recordings and treat them digitally, that's a sort of there's a connection between both of those thoughts, between the content and the lyrics and the way, or am I just way off?
Actually, it's an interesting thought. At the core, I think at the core of what we're doing is a celebration and an investigation of contrast. Things that you wouldn't expect to find union. You know, aspects of sound and musics from different cultures, ideas borrowed from sometimes like very dichotomous musical traditions. That's kind of that's at the heart of Son Lux, and that's how we find interesting material, is by combining things that sort of don't belong together. But what is the philosophy behind that is that that distinction and stark contrasts are great. That's actually a place where richness and life happens. And then I guess you could say, sociologically speaking and culturally speaking, what follows, or the parallel to that, is a certain type of diversity, and a certain type of color, and that that the rainbow is better than the black and white image, you know, and as such, I mean, and there is a sensitivity, of course, in this band to that. Like on a sociological, on a cultural level, we come from, you know, like Rafiq and I, at least, we're both Americans, and like our the whole reason why our country exists is because of an incredible number of people that were oppressed and enslaved, and that remains part of the fabric of our country, and has given rise to every single day incredible frustrations and terrible things, and in particular last year there were so many events, one after the other, as we peered across the Atlantic, while we're on tour, peer across the Atlantic, and hear, you know, every time we turn on our phones, it's just like some absolutely horrendous, terrible thing happening in our country, and the common theme seemed to be black and white, you know, just like over and over again, or rich and poor, you know, and the growing disparity, so those things inevitably, as we're developing Bones, inevitably those sensitivities and those points of frustration and the anger and the sadness, works their way into the music. I think not just lyrically, but also sonically. There's a lot of that, you know, inside of the sound.
Do you think the feeling was stronger since you were away from home so much on tour, that you
I think personally for me it was, because like when you're at home and some shit goes down, you just like, you can at least, you feel like you feel kind of powerless, of course, but you also feel like, no, like this is not the country I'm gonna live in. This is not the kind of American. I'm gonna be a different kind of American. And when you're there and you're walking down the street and you are in America and you can make decisions that impact other people, your fellow countrymen, in the way you think, in the way you act, in the way you spend your money, then yes, you gain your power back that way, and like so it's not, so you have something to do with your frustration. Well, that's how I felt about it.
And now there's elections coming up, but that's a whole different story, right? Let's not get into it. Maybe we should leave some time to open it up to the public for the last 15 minutes or whatnot. So is there anybody in here who has a question for any three of those guys? Or all three of them?
I would like to know how important is light and all the rest besides the music and besides the instruments you're playing. I mean, as an audience, you're watching you play, but above the stage, many things are happening. And I mean, how do you decide on this, or how is this going? All about the light show and things.
It's at the moment we don't have a lighting person that travels with us. That's definitely something that we want to add as we make more money. But at the moment it doesn't quite make sense yet, but lucky for you guys, AB is pretty awesome and it's gonna look good. Well, we do communicate with the local lighting guys every time we go to a place, and we're actually getting better at this. We sort of like learn more, and we're starting to play venues that have like more sort of like capacity to do like specific kinds of things. There's gonna be something like that tonight that you'll see, hopefully. It's something that we think about a lot. And we have some very general notes that we give them, like keep our like faces lit and like so that you can see what we're doing, but also like don't be afraid to do like really crazy stuff. And like sometimes we'll like make a set list and like write notes for each song. And it's the best when like someone like already knows the music, you know. And so someday we are doing actually our first show ever with an LD that we're hiring in London in a couple days. So that'll be new territory for us. But that's definitely like we've had discussions in the bands of like dreams. It's like, oh, wouldn't it be so cool if it was all like synced up and like ta pa pa, you know, like all this stuff can happen. But like that's on the horizon for us right now as far as like visually. But like we do think about like. And like I've played in a bunch of other bands, like I would say more so than most bands, like we do think about like how just like things like look. I mean, we're not like, you know, dressing up or doing anything crazy, but it's like we're just trying to like keep things like like clean and like looking good. I don't know. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, I was wondering if you had the means also, if you plan to add some orchestral instruments in your live, if it was possible. I think it could be great.
Yeah, every once in a while. The question was, have we ever tried to incorporate orchestral instruments or chamber instruments into our set? We do occasionally do that, and you know, it's right now it's mostly about where we have relationships with enough great musicians in what cities we have those relationships, because kind of like the ceiling we hit with lighting, ultimately it's very expensive, and it should be, because musicians should be paid and lighting designers should be paid and all those things, but it means that there's an incremental journey to get there, and so when we can integrate instruments, but it's and recently what we did was really cool. We did this show recently that was an acoustic show with horns. Is something called the Tiny Desk Concert. Some of you guys see this? Yeah, so that was like a special occasion where we knew we were in Washington DC, and I am dear friends with the guy who plays saxophone, and he's played on all the records except for Bones, actually, but he's the saxophone part, iconic saxophone part in Easy, bop 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 bop, you know, that's my friend Steve. And then I said to him, hey dude, what if we did this idea where we brought in a bunch of your homies? He's in the Presidential Marine Band. It's like a very specialized band that part of the military that does whatever Obama does. They go and they do his thing. Or if very important people die and there's ceremonies, like this is the band that does it. So I was like, what if we get some of your dudes and I write arrangements. We come up with arrangements for a few songs that you guys come in. We're in DC, in the middle of the day, you guys come over and we rock out these songs together. And then that night, come on stage and do it with us on stage. So that was a particular moment where it was really cool, you know, and it was like we had an opportunity and we seized on it. Before I had a band, I did a bunch of like really stupid things where I would like every single show would be different and the arrangements would be totally different for every show, and I'd hire all these people to put together this complex thing, and then it was really awesome.
Ambitious.
It was awesome because it was ambitious. But it was innately, it was frustrating because like you could never get a good show under your belt. Like every show was like you could barely do it, and then you move on, and yeah.
Sounds like fun.
In a sort of way, like it was actually really fun, you know. But that's partly my personality.
Anyone else? Is there a once in a lifetime opportunity?
Are you guys? Have you seen Son Lux before live? Yeah, a few guys. Oh, sweet. This is pretty cool, actually.
Do you guys have any questions about file management?
Are most of you guys musicians? Are some of you guys musicians? Or like hobbyists and stuff? How many can you guys raise your hand? How many of you are like not necessarily professional musicians, but like hobbyist musicians, bedroom producers? How many of you guys? Sweet. That's awesome. And how many of you guys with the show of hands is it like laptop based? Like is the laptop like your vehicle? Oh, wow, that's really interesting. So mostly guitar, piano, like voice singing, like drums, yeah. Cool.
Do you have any more questions for the audience?
Do I have time for
What's your social security?
I really like your sound, but what I find more exciting about you is that how you mix the lyrics with your sound, with the drums and the synthesizers and the guitars. So if you could explain me just how you mix all of them together to make one song.
Yeah, that's a good question. I have always written songs kind of backwards, and the same is true with Bones. And actually, maybe Bones is the most extreme example of this, where rather than so when this building was built, right? The building we're in, they built the sort of the foundation and the walls, the primary structure, and then they moved inward and finished everything, and then eventually like they added those lights, and then like they brought this table in, and then like they bought a box of mugs, etc., until it became what it is now, right? And imagine building a building backwards, where you ordered a box of mugs, right? And you had him delivered to a field. You open the box, and then you go, what kind of table do I want to put this mug on? And then you make the table, or you find the table. And then what sort of rug and then what sort of room, what size, what other things are in that room? And then where is this room in a larger building? And then where is this building? What kind of street is it on? What city? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you sort of work out from this, right? And what's crazy is like you could go anywhere from here, right? You could literally go anywhere from here. But you start from here. And for me, working backwards, and basically what this means is finding a little tiny piece of sound or a piece of performance or an intriguing mistake in audio that we've tracked, and you mine the potential for that little sound, and you create a world around that sound bit by bit by bit by bit. And once then you've discovered, you know, that world through your imagination and through trial and error and through a lot of work, then it's time to actually like build the outside. It's time to build the surface that everyone sees when they think of that building. They think of the outside of the building. They think of that color. Oh, that's that building that's pink and has a silver siding and like 3 weird shaped windows on the outside. Well, yes, but that's what it looks like on the outside. To me, that's like what a melody or like what a song is. For our music, it's like there's a thing that you see on the outside and there's a way into it. But once you're inside of it, there's this whole other world, and that world was actually created first. So melody and lyric, and in some cases harmony, they come very late in the game. And the song I sort of discover the song inside of the world that, you know, that we've made. And so maybe that's an answer to why there's like a particular blend that you hear, the sounds and the lyrics. It's maybe because we've come at them from the opposite side rather than trying to find a way to embellish the lyrics.
I actually have something to add to that, which is that unlike this mug, which is beautiful but very general, a lot of times the fragment that is the sort of catalyst or the starting point for the music is something that's very particular. Like, you know, it could be the sound of Ian playing a fill when we were just checking if the mics were on, and then at the end of the fill, he like drops his drumsticks and starts laughing or something. And we take that fill, and you hear the drumsticks rolling off of the drum, and all of a sudden that becomes the starting point for a piece of music or something. You know, like
what happened
which
with our song White Lies on Bones. There's a recurring fill, and then you hear like these sticks sort of rattle and hit the. You know, he puts them down.
Yeah, and the thing about something like that that's different from a mug like this is that when you're building around it, you can kind of highlight those particularities and integrate them into like kind of the essential part of the structure in a way that you couldn't if you kind of like went backwards. Yeah. And that's, you know, or went forward, as it were. But that's one of the things that, practically speaking, separates the way it ends up sounding, is that you can really kind of like those particularities can be like a fundamental part of the sound, as opposed to being something that is the result of trying to execute something that was predetermined.
Really
So I get it. There's no real sort of demo phase where the record company goes like, "Hey, you guys, let's make a new record."
We don't do demos, and I've never done demos like ever once. Well, what I will do is, you know, I'll make 5 different versions of the song, and that happened less with Bones, but with Lanterns there were a few tracks there were 4 or 5 different versions that were pretty different. You know, even at the last minute I was like totally changing things, and you know. Because there's no demo, there's no like approval process from like, you know, that crap.
Do we have time for one more?
One more?
Yeah. Actually, kind of answer my question. I was going to ask, what's your mug? Because I wanted to know if the words, I mean, the lyrics, were the lyrics, your mug, because me, your sounds, your music, and self, really sounds like the idea you want to convey with your lyrics. So,
That's because
you were saying it's not usually the words, but more sounds that
I guess
a song.
Yeah, another way to put it is like a lot of times like you'll write a piece of music that's like a song, and then you take it to the studio and you're like, okay, well, what's the spirit of this song? How do we represent that sonically with like the sound we're gonna get in the studio? And sometimes that's a really hard thing to do, and a lot of times it's really easy to just kind of represent the song like in a really like flat way sonically. But like the song is what it is. But like for us, it's kind of like the spirit of the song like starts from like the sounds, and there's like an energy to that, and then like eventually like lyrics kind of come out.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Maybe the last one back there. Oh, there's 2. Ladies first.
Well, I'm so hungry, but I had just one more question. The sound of Bones. When I had to describe to someone how Son Lux sounds, and especially Bones, I just couldn't imagine how I should do that. So you guys, how would you describe the sound?
Hardest question last. That's gonna take us another hour. Yeah, so I definitely get asked this a lot. Like, I was on the plane over here, sitting next to this like delightful older Belgian woman, and she's like, you know, oh, c'est en Belgique. She's like, what? She was so proud of like me and didn't know me at all. And she was like, so that's like saying that to her. And you know, she's like, so what does your music sound like? You know, you would hate it. No. So usually what I say is, well, as opposed to like jazz or rock or something, we think of it as pop music, but it's pretty experimental, and we're not necessarily using traditional instruments. Sometimes we are, but we're also kind of creating instruments of our own, and we build a lot of the sounds from the ground up. So while while it's kind of pop, it's not necessarily sounds that we use aren't necessarily pop sounds, and generally I think there's two important things about our music, or at least like what I try to say is a very simplification, which is it's emotional music. There's a lot of like, you know, pathos to it, but it's also pretty technical music. And I think usually those things don't like go hand in hand. Usually you have like sort of like real technical, you know, really technical electronic or chamber music or jazz or, you know, or like art rock, you know, that's like, but it's kind of like emotionally distant. So I think our music tends to be hard on the sleeve, but also in experimental and technical in nature, which I think is, it doesn't necessarily tell you, oh, it sounds like that band Creed.
Or I think we sound kind of like Creed.
Or that band like, what's another terrible band? Nickelback. You know, wow, those are two really good bands.
You have to thank Nickelback for existing to be the like butt end of like every single.
It's true. Anyway, so that's what I try to avoid, is saying it sounds like this person or this person, because really I think that's usually what they're trying to ask. It's like, oh, you know, does it sound like Radiohead, or does it sound like FKA Twigs or something like that? And I feel like you can't really get to the heart of it by saying those things, at least with our music. But I, at the same time, am probably the exact wrong person to answer the question, right? Because we see everything, it's all pixelated, and we know what we think it sounds like, but who the heck knows, you know? Thank you. I think that's it for tonight. Thank you so much for coming.